Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called Dollbloods. It's a nice piece of comedic fantasy, inspired by stuff like Terry Pratchett and Yancey Crowshaw's first novel, Mogworld. If you're looking for something new to read and feel like supporting a struggling indie, check it out. Links are in the description. Well, it's happened again. My backlog gone and grown bigger. When I was planning to focus on the recent horror game Jawbreaker, that was when, so many other titles decided they had to come out and draw away my attention. So for your viewing pleasure, I won't be reviewing Jawbreaker. Instead, I'll be reviewing it alongside some of the other games that have gone on to clutter up my backlog recently. I've kept you all waiting long enough. Let's get this going with one of two games I was originally planning to review after Jawbreaker, Nine Souls. This is the latest title from Red Candle Games, a Taiwanese developer whose previous work consists of walking sim-style horror games. Their second game, Devotion, is famous due to it being no longer available to buy legally thanks to controversy involving a poster in the game that rustled the Chinese government's jimmies. Going from making story-driven horror to a 2D Metroidvania Souls-like is quite the shift in genre, but boy howdy did they pull it off. Now, the most obvious inspiration for Nine Souls was Sekiro, with combat having a heavy emphasis on timing your blocks, parries, and acrobatic feats. With the 2D plane, you'd think this style of gameplay wouldn't translate over as well compared to a 3D environment, but no, it actually rather works a treat. The enemy animations have plenty of flourish to them that lets the player learn to time their parries effectively, and make the most of the talisman mechanic. This lets the player take advantage of an enemy being stunned by a successful parry to slap them with an attack that deals extreme amounts of damage. And capping off a successful parry with exploding your foes into strawberry jam is never not satisfying. Sucks you have to hold down the talisman button until you find the upgrade later on, but still satisfying. Every encounter feels like a delicate dance of timing and precision, rewarding players who master the art of parrying with fluid and satisfying combat sequences. However, it can't be denied that there is a notable sense of frustration that arises in the moments where you forget the controls or can't get a parry just right. You would be forgiven for letting your blood boil over a little when previously manageable enemies are suddenly able to bend you over like it's the prison shower. The Metroidvania exploration can also be rather cumbersome in the early game, since you have to wait until you're able to upgrade your run speed and the early areas don't have much in the way of interconnectivity between them. Something else that sets Nine Souls apart from Red Candle's previous games, in a good way, is its art direction. Detention and Devotion had darker, grimier art styles with occasional splashes of colour, fitting for their stories, but in contrast, Nine Souls embraces a more vibrant and distinct art style. The Taoist-inspired sci-fi style that the devs have called Taopunk is full of brighter, more distinct colours that just pop out, making this world that's a marriage of the mystical and the futuristic feel all the more unique. The game's soundtrack also deserves praise. It perfectly complements the game's atmosphere and action. The game's soundtrack also deserves praise. It perfectly complements the game's atmosphere and action. From the boss battles to the moments where you're just exploring, the music does a great job of helping you feel immersed in this world and the story as it unfolds. Another game that does a tremendous job of pulling you into its story and world would be Ghost of Tsushima. The formerly PlayStation exclusive has finally joined Days Gone, Horizon Zero Dawn, and God of War in the hallowed halls of the PC gaming master race. What struck out to me upon first playing Ghost of Tsushima was the graphics. This game, put simply, is stunning to look at. I first tried it out on my Steam Deck, and man, it blew me away on that. But on my desktop where it could run on higher settings, my god. As you can see, the island was able to shine vividly, and at times it felt outright lifelike. The smart use of colour and attention to detail from Sucker Punch alone is worthy of an award in of itself. As for the gameplay, it's not anything new. If you've played the recent RPG Assassin's Creed games, then you've played this. But what it does remarkably well within this mold, and it strikes a balance between accessibility and depth, giving us a case of easy to learn, but hard to master. Combat revolves around reading animation and sound cues to get a feel for your enemy's behaviour, learning when to dodge, block, parry, and attack to come out on top. You've also got to consider which combat stance is best for the current scenario, and you've also got special attacks to help give you an edge. However, players may find themselves frustrated more than once with the combat. It'll be a common occurrence where you'll go into combat thinking that you've got the hang of it, only for basic bitch enemies to treat you to the prison shower special. If this sounds like Ghost of Tsushima is a Souls-like, it's not. Like I said, the combat is a case of easy to learn but hard to master, but there's no denying that the combat in this game can feel punishing, which will frustrate some players at times. Now, as for the story of this game, it is a love letter to everything Akira Kurosawa, with its protagonist, Jin Sakai, emerging as a compelling character struggling with a unique moral dilemma. He's torn between his samurai code of honor and the more practical and often dishonorable tactics necessary to protect Tsushima. This internal conflict can be represented organically through the gameplay, when the player has to choose between favoring open combat over stealth. Everything works in favor of the narrative, giving us a journey of personal growth and moral dilemmas that, even in the early stages, will resonate with the player. But it's worth noting the one major drawback for the PC port: its inability to access the Legends multiplayer mode without linking your Steam account to the PlayStation Network. Given the history of data leaks and hacks with the PSN, this requirement introduces potential security concerns on top of it just being completely unnecessary. The only reason for it is so Sony can get their hands on our precious personal data to sell it off to third parties. It's an inconvenience that will keep most of the PC players from checking out what I've heard is a quite remarkable multiplayer experience.
The heavenly strike couldn't save you.
Now let's talk about a game from the legacy publisher 3D Realms. This is Ripout, a co-op horror shooter that is brimming with creativity and features some pretty noticeable jank. Ripout's most notable feature is the, well, Ripout mechanic, a unique gameplay feature where players rip living weapons from enemies, or from the floor, and use them alongside their conventional weapons. This concept adds a layer of strategy, as each enemy you encounter presents an opportunity to try out a new sub-weapon that can do anything from melee attacks, force fields, healing, and more. Ripping these sub-weapons also adds a risk and reward factor, as your primary weapon has to be sent out to do the ripping, leaving you with only a sidearm and sub-weapon to stay alive. However, there's no denying that the rip-out mechanic does feel underbaked, and more could have been done with it. Why can't I rip out chunks from the larger enemies when they don't have a sub-weapon and get a temporary buff, or maybe rare crafting resources and weapon upgrades for taking the risk? That would add a lot to the game's core idea. The game also sports an eye-catching art style that can be best described as biomechanical apocalypse, and not only is it well realized, but also distinct. The melding of the organic and the mechanical is something that I love, and while each mission's locale is randomly generated, they do feel suitably lived in and messed up. It reminds me of a little-known horror movie I enjoyed called Virus, a B-movie about a computer virus from space that turns the crew of a ship into an army of killer cyborgs. The similarities in Ripout are uncanny and make me suspect Virus was an influence on the game's art direction. However, it does need to be said that the game has a very lackluster narrative that is easily forgettable. I honestly couldn't care less about finding Sanctuary or what happened to humanity. I just cared about completing the missions and earning loot and crafting resources. It doesn't help that the quality of the voice acting for your AI companion leaves a lot to be desired. Honestly, a random porn actress or even Joe Biden would have done a better job. Something else that stuck out to me was how forgiving Ripout's roguelite mechanics were. This mitigates the frustration that comes from getting close to finishing a mission, only to fail and lose everything you collected up to that point. Ripout lets the player keep all the schematics and crafting resources they collected, even if they fail their current mission. The only thing they miss out on are the set rewards for each mission that you would have got on top of everything you'd collected. This encourages the player to explore a level during a mission without the fear of stepping too far off the trail and into a kill zone and losing all of the progress they made. But I should also point out that Ripout, again, was intended to be played in co-op. This focus on multiplayer can lead to situations that feel unfair at best or horrifically unbalanced at worse. Solo players can find themselves in desperate uphill battles or facing outright no-win scenarios, going up against multiple enemies armed with multiple sub-weapons, turning them into a horde of death that only a group would have a chance of not only fighting, but also beating. The next game in my Backlog Showcase is an early access title from the creators of Ori and the Blind Forest, and it's a fusion of two genres I enjoy: Souls-likes and ARPGs. Won't lie, I wanted to support this game after I found out Moon Studios fired their diversity consultant due to them basically trying to ruin the game and making the studio a toxic workplace. Considering the quality of No Rest for the Wicked, this was the wise decision. The first thing that stuck out to me about No Rest for the Wicked was its art style, which is stunning to say the least. The game resembles watercolor paintings, and during the cutscenes you can see everything up close, and the whole thing just looks like an animated series, one that's stylized to resemble a moving painting. The visuals of this game alone are just beautiful, and you can waste time admiring how good it looks. It should also be said that the art style and bright colors do not detract from this being a dark part of this game's world. The best comparison would be JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, a dark world that's full of colourful characters. It's just a shame that while this art style is fantastic, the game's character creator is just very lacking. Personally, I find it to be severely limited, with no way to make a character look appealing in a way that's in line with the art style. They always end up looking like an Arthur German reference. But at least the game's animation fit the art style perfectly. They're exaggerated and expressive, telegraphing enemy behavior clearly to the player while also letting them get a hand on when to time their attacks, blocks, and dodges. Which reminds me, the gameplay itself is a mix of Diablo, Dark Souls, and survival crafting, which seems odd at first and you think would be hard to get on point, but no. It all comes together into something that, to quote Todd Howard, just works. Crafting is tied to upgrading the central hub over any real character or equipment progression, so it becomes secondary to the action rather than just constantly interrupting the flow. Food replaces the Estus flask, requiring the player to prepare strategically in advance by stocking up on raw snacks and hot meals. The only real issue with the gameplay is the isometric camera. It can easily get blocked off by the environment, making it difficult to tell just what the hell is around you. God help you if this happens while you're getting mobbed by enemies. Also, while the game ran smoothly on my Steam Deck, it had a habit of having the frame rate fluctuate or the occasional sound glitch when I played it on my desktop. While more of a sign of this game's early access status, these hiccups can hurt immersion and how fun the experience can be. Now let's touch on a game from a publisher I've been keeping an eye on that done nothing but good work so far, and it looks like this game is only going to continue that trend. Fallen Aces from New Blood Interactive. Fallen Aces sets itself apart from the rest of New Blood's portfolio with its art style. Instead of retro 3D or early Macintosh graphics, it goes for a stylized look, one inspired by detective comics and noir, which is also in line with the story it's going for. A throwback to the pulp stories and early superheroes of the early 20th century, colour wasn't spared either. While this is a dark story about a detective fighting against the corruption at the rotten heart of a city, the world is still full of colour and very thick outlines. The gameplay is a healthy mix of titles like Thief, Gloomwood, and Dishonored. While melee combat is at the core of Fallen Aces, stealth and exploration of the open-ended levels give you plenty of options to deal with the challenges the game throws at you. The melee combat is centered around boxing techniques. It's a nice change of pace, flows well, and is fitting for the setting and tone of the story, but it's not the only string to your bow. You still have access to guns, and there's also a sense of improvisation, as you can pick up everyday objects like bottles and guitars to use as weapons. Combined with a period-appropriate soundtrack, you regularly feel like you're in a barroom brawl, fighting off Al Capone's goons while your gal cheers you on. However, there is an issue with readability when it does come to the enemy attacks. I found it hard at times to read the telegraphs, which can lead to frustration as you stuff up a cakewalk and turn it into a lead pipe to the teeth. Next up is a game that's been in development hell for almost a decade now, trading hands between 3 different developers before finally settling on a final version and seeing the light of day. It had everything working against it and could have easily wound up one of the worst releases of 2023, yet it all worked out in the end. Dead Island 2 managed to beat the odds and came out as a fun and thoroughly enjoyable RPG that, while was more of what we got with the first 2 games, adds enough extra to the formula to help keep it fresh and fun. Once more, one of the first things that stood out to me about Dead Island 2 were its visuals. They paint a vibrant and colourful depiction of Los Angeles, presenting a believable yet stylized depiction of the city. It's believably colourful, yet you can tell how paper thin the beauty of the speck and sparkle really is, ironically making it feel all the more real. At the core, the gameplay of Dead Island 2 is the same as it was with the 2 prior games. It does introduce a few small things that altogether do keep things fresh. One is a new gore generation system that really enhances the impact of combat, making it all the more satisfying when you break a zombie's legs, slice off an arm, or crack a skull like a ripe watermelon. There's also greater environmental interaction, which makes the combat feel more dynamic and, well, fun, since players can use their surroundings to creatively burn, impale, slice, crush, and trip up zombies. And it is never not satisfying factoring this into your beatdown of the undead. Another neat addition is the skill card system. This is a real standout feature and has more depth than it needs for what is essentially a perk system, since it lets the player customize and shake up their character's playstyle to be more to their liking, by adding complementary abilities, stat modification, and even difficulty modifiers. The player characters lend themselves more to different playstyles. By swapping around these cards, you can make up for their deficiencies, or lean them towards being a hybrid of two different playstyles, and it all works. While the game's setting of Hell A is well realised, the side characters can be really hit or miss, with some just being insufferable, and you just want them to shut their friggin' mouths. A great example of this would be the influencer you help out at the streaming mansion. While she is a good example of how shitty the people of LA can be, not just influencer types, she's too good at it, and I wanted the mission helping her make content to end because it meant she would finally shut the hell up. There's also the departure from the open world format to an open-ended hub instead. This can't help but feel like a step backward, despite the game's troubled development history. It takes away from the sense of freedom the first two games had with their sandboxes when you run into loading screens with far greater frequency. Now to wrap everything up, let's talk about a horror game that I was originally going to do a dedicated video of. The latest game by indie dev Vincent Lade, Jawbreaker. I was drawn to this because I played one of his earlier games, Hawthorne, which was about a security guard trying to do his job in a school when it looks like a former staff member may still be around. Despite being a rather rough walking sim-esque game, I enjoyed it, and found that it did enough with its story and gameplay to be an enjoyable horror experience. With Jawbreaker, it looked like Vincent had built on both his prior and later work to make something more ambitious. What I got was something that reflected that ambition and experience that was also rough as sandpaper at times. One of the things that really stuck out to me about Jawbreaker was its obvious inspirations. Taking cues from punk rock and horror films like The Strangers, we get a pretty tense atmosphere as we explore a police station that's been taken over by a gang of masked killers, where around any corner one of these masked freaks could be waiting, ready to tan your skin into their new pair of dance pants. So the game does deliver some decent scares, and yes, while there are jump scares, the game does use them with a sense of control. So when they happen, they're all the more effective and feel earned rather than just a cheap attempt at trying to scare the player. Gameplay in Jawbreaker is broken up into short, stealth-focused levels, where solving puzzles is what you'll be doing as you avoid the killers. Combat is more of a last resort, and very resource draining, that can bite the player in the ass if they decide to engage with it. So there is depth and creativity to the gameplay, giving it a great sense of tension that can keep the player on the edge of their seat at first. You see, Jawbreaker's gameplay is undermined by the fact the levels are very heavily scripted with little room for error. The ease with which players can be detected, die, and fail is annoying, and it doesn't help how repetitious the game over cinematics can get. Once the player has redone the same level 10 times, it doesn't take long for them to figure out the exact sequence of actions to breeze through the level, killing off the suspense and turning what was a Sex Pistols-fueled homage to The Strangers into an Imagine Dragons-inspired homage to Paranoid Activity 2. Which is a real knockoff, by the way. It's a terrible movie. But of course, what's a horror game without resource management? With Jawbreaker, not only does this factor into puzzles and survival, but also dealing with immediate threats. Like I said, combat can be costly. Since you get barely any ammo for the guns, wasting a precious bullet on an enemy in the heat of the moment could mean being screwed in a later encounter. Never mind the fact that firing off in the first place could draw the attention of other enemies to you. This also makes exploring the levels rewarding in spite of the danger, since it rewards the player not just with crucial resources, but also collectibles. However, a major drawback is that when you start playing Jawbreaker, you must not use the level selector unless you want to start a new game much later on. You see, using the level selector resets the player without any extra resources. Even if it was stuff that was on the critical path, nah, screw you. You're starting with only the critical key items, no healing items, bullets, or faceless coins for you. So for the best experience, you're better off ignoring the level selector until you finish your current playthrough, or else you're gonna have a bad time. Now to wrap this up, I'd like to make a few honourable mentions. These are games that were going to get their own segments in the video, but had to be cut for time. First off, Helldivers 2. Easily the best Vietnam War simulator on the market with fair monetization policies, only marred by the PSN controversy, retarded community managers, and questionable balancing changes. Power World, the Pokemon game that Game Freak and Nintendo wish they'd made that actually feels like an evolution of the series, despite not doing anything new at the core. Also helps that it doesn't shy away from the darker aspects of its lore. The Consuming Shadow, the horror roguelike by one of my favourite authors and content creators, Yahtzee. A genuinely chilling experience that's hard, but fair and true to the spirit of Lovecraft. Gloomwood, the early access spiritual successor to Thief that's now a whole lot meatier in its current form. Also helps they could pass for an unofficial Thief title from the 90s. Big catch, Tacklebox, a free demo that's basically a standalone game that paints an addictively positive picture for an upcoming throwback to both the platformers of the N64 and Sega's Bass fishing games. Alright, thank you for checking out this video, I really do appreciate that, and I'd really like it if you also hit the like and subscribe buttons, and don't forget to check out Dollbloods, links are in the description. Sorry this was late, as I said before, a lot of stuff kept coming out, and my attention kept getting diverted, but hey, better late than never. I should have a review of Shin Ultraman out by the time this video goes live, and I'm planning to take a look at Alien Romulus next. I'll be honest, the trailer for that actually won me over, and I want to give it a chance at the very least. And for the next game review, I'm planning to take a look at Black Myth Wukong. That thing's got me salivating something fierce. I've got all that more coming up, so please stick around.